On March 28th and 29th, the shadow that began with the blood-red moon on March 3rd completes its arc. A lunar eclipse in Libra, full and exact and unusually close to Earth. And if you have been feeling unsteady in the week since that first eclipse, if something in you has been quietly bracing without knowing what it is bracing for, this is why. The sky has been holding a question open since early March, and these 2 days are when it demands an answer. Not out loud, not in dramatic terms, but in the private internal way that the deepest questions always arrive. In the body, in the sleep, in the quality of silence between you and the people you love. If you have been feeling it already, the low-grade restlessness, the strange pressure that settles in the chest on quiet evenings, the sense that something is approaching that you cannot yet name and cannot quite outrun. There is a reason for that. The eclipse is not beginning on March 28th. It began weeks ago, and you have been living inside it. What the 28th and 29th bring is not the start but the peak, the moment when what has been gathering in you asks to be acknowledged. Something is tightening, not dramatically, not in a way that announces itself with urgency or noise, more like the way the air in a room changes when the barometric pressure drops before a storm. Nothing visible has altered, but the quality of everything is different. You feel it in the most ordinary moments, getting ready in the morning, driving the familiar route, sitting in a room full of people you have known for years. Everything looks exactly the same, and yet something in you is watching it differently. Something in you is taking a kind of inventory that it has not been asked to take in a long time. Your sleep has shifted. That is almost always where it begins, in the particular quality of your nights. You may have been sleeping, but not resting, going through all the motions of sleep, lying down, closing your eyes, moving through the hours, and waking feeling as if you have been somewhere difficult, even if you cannot remember where. As if the work that needs to be done in you is happening in the dark. In those hours you are not conscious for, and the only evidence it leaves is a heaviness in the mornings that coffee does not touch. The things you used to reach for at the end of a long day, the comfort, the particular routine, the specific way you used to make peace with yourself before closing your eyes, they are not working the way they used to. You lie down and the thoughts come anyway. Not the urgent, anxious kind of thought, the old kind, the slow, patient, heavy kind that has no immediate answer and no obvious remedy. The kind that has been in line for a while, waiting for a quiet moment, and has finally found you. You may have found yourself pulling back from conversations that would normally feel easy. Not from conflict, and there is nothing you could point to and call conflict, but because something in you is conserving, watching more carefully than usual, measuring, almost without meaning to, how much of yourself you spend in the company of others and what you have left when you return to yourself at the end of a day. There is a kind of tiredness in you right now that sleep does not touch. It lives deeper than the body. It sits in the part of you that has been carrying things for a very long time without anyone, including you, thinking to ask whether you needed to set them down. And underneath all of that, something else, quieter than the tiredness, harder to name than the restlessness. A question that keeps arriving at the edges of your awareness, in the car, in the space between tasks, in the particular stillness just before sleep finally comes. The question does not arrive with drama or volume. It arrives softly, almost apologetically, as if it knows it has been here before and was gently turned away. The question is simply this: is this still who I am? Not a crisis, not a breakdown, not a declaration that anything is wrong, just a question, patient, persistent. And this eclipse, these 2 days at the end of March, is the reason it is louder now than it has been in years. Stay with me. What I am about to tell you matters. Welcome. If you are watching this, you are one of thousands of people sitting with this video in the same window of hours, in different houses, different time zones, different circumstances, and sharing this particular quality of inner weather. That is not nothing. The simultaneity of that, the fact that tens of thousands of people who have never met are sitting right now with the same unnamed heaviness, the same circling thoughts, the same quality of question. There is something grounding in that. You are not alone in what you are carrying. you are in fact in very large company. If this channel has been giving you language for what you have been feeling, do something for me before we go deeper. Leave a comment below. Not something hopeful, something honest. Tell me, just 3 or 4 words if that is all you have. What is the one thing you have been avoiding looking at? Write it there, beneath this video. Know that someone who understands is reading it, and that naming it out loud, even in a comment section, is not nothing. It is the beginning of the thing the Eclipse is asking of you. If you have not subscribed yet, take a moment now before we go further. New content comes regularly, and it is made for exactly where you are in your life. Now, let's go into this honestly. Let's talk about what is actually happening in these eclipse days, and what you need to be very careful of in the energy that follows. There is a specific quality of fatigue that does not come from doing too much. It does not come from a long week or an overfull schedule or the ordinary depletion of a life with a lot of demands on it. This fatigue comes from holding, from the sustained, quiet daily effort of keeping things in their proper places, keeping your relationships in the shape that other people have grown accustomed to, keeping your feelings behind the face that the world has learned to read as yours, keeping the version of yourself that the people around you are comfortable with intact and available and accessible, even on the days when that version feels like something you are putting on in the morning along with your clothes. A costume that fits but does not belong to you the way it once seemed to. That fatigue, the holding fatigue, the performing fatigue, is what many of you have been living inside for longer than just these past few weeks. It did not begin with this eclipse cycle. It began in a season you might recognize if you think back carefully, a season when you decided, for reasons that made complete sense at the time, that keeping the peace was worth a certain amount of self-containment. When you learned that some parts of you were better kept private. When you discovered that being easier to be around was its own kind of protection. The eclipse is not creating that fatigue. It is making it impossible to dismiss any longer. Let's begin with your sleep, because that is where the eclipse always makes its first approach. In the unguarded hours, in the territory of the night, where the ordinary defenses are not on duty. The dreams have been different. If you remember them, they have been unusually vivid, unusually populated with old faces and old places, with situations that you believed were resolved years or even decades ago, now replaying themselves with slight but significant variations. Not exactly as they happened, close enough to be unmistakably about what they are about. Your dreaming mind is doing something right now that is purposeful, even if it does not feel purposeful from inside. It is reviewing. Not the way you review a document for errors, but the way you review a life for meaning. What did you actually do with all those years? Where were you faithful to yourself? And where did you compromise yourself so many times and so quietly that the compromise eventually became invisible, became simply who you were? These questions are not arriving in the dreams as words or explicit themes. They are arriving as feeling. That dense, specifically weighted feeling of being shown something you already knew, but had not yet allowed yourself to fully know. The feeling of recognition, not discovery. And when you wake from those dreams, especially the most vivid ones, there is a moment, brief in the borderland between sleeping and waking, when something is clear, something your waking mind will immediately begin to soften and manage and make more comfortable. Catch that moment. It is one of the most honest things the eclipse is offering you. It does not stay long, and the ordinary intelligence of daily life moves quickly to qualify and contextualize and reduce it to something more manageable. Try to let it be what it is for just a few seconds longer than you usually would. Now let's talk about the people around you. Relationships feel different right now for most people in the range of this eclipse. Not worse necessarily, just different. As if you are standing at a slightly different angle to people you have known for years, and from this angle you can see the shape of the relationship in a way that was not visible before. The contours of what is actually being exchanged, who is receiving from whom, what role you have been playing and what that role has cost you, measured in the currency of your own energy and authenticity. For some of you, this looks like a sudden, clarifying awareness of which relationships leave you fuller and which leave you emptier. Not in a judgmental way, not as an assessment of who is good or bad, but as a simple, metabolic reality. You sit with some people and afterward you feel more yourself, more awake, more connected to what you actually value. You sit with others, and afterward you feel flattened, slightly erased, as if a version of you was required for that interaction that is less real than the one you brought to it. The eclipse is turning up the volume on that signal. It is making the difference between those two categories harder to ignore. For others, what the eclipse is doing in your relationships is more specific and more uncomfortable. It is showing you the precise shape of a particular compromise you have been living inside. The way you have learned, in one relationship or several, to give a slightly edited version of yourself, to soften a corner here, to keep a view private there, to agree more readily than you actually agree, to not push back when pushing back would have been honest. You learned this because it worked, because the relationship required it, because the cost of full honesty at some point seemed to exceed what the relationship could bear. And you accommodated. You adjusted. You made yourself a more manageable size, and you have been living in that adjustment so long that it no longer feels like an adjustment. It feels like who you are in that relationship. The eclipse is illuminating the gap, the distance between the version of you that shows up in that relationship and the version of you that would show up if you believed you were truly safe being whole. Cognitively, something has also been happening. If you are someone who usually has access to a clear, organized internal narrator, who can think through problems sequentially, who finds comfort in analysis and structure and the particular satisfaction of a thing being understood, that narrator has been unreliable recently. Thoughts that are usually sequential have been circular. You begin a line of thinking and find yourself arriving back where you started without having traveled anywhere. You reach for a conclusion and find it dissolving under your hand like ice. This is not a problem with your thinking. This is the eclipse doing something quite specific. It is interfering with the cognitive strategies you ordinarily use to keep certain realizations at a manageable distance. The mind that usually helps you stay on top of your interior life is being asked temporarily to stand down so that something older and less rational and more essential can come forward. That is disorienting. Of course it is. But disorientation is not danger. In this context, it is depth. And then there is the grief. Some of you know exactly what you are grieving in these eclipse days. A specific loss, a specific ending, a specific relationship that has changed or is changing in ways that require mourning. Others of you have the feeling of grief without a clear object, a sadness that seems to belong to everything and nothing at once, that is present in the background of even ordinary moments, that does not intensify enough to cry, but also does not clear. That diffuse, pervasive grief is real. It is not vague or unspecific. It is actually very specific. But what it is specific to is harder to name than a person or an event. It is specific to a version of your life that is no longer possible, to a version of yourself that served a purpose for a long time, and that this eclipse is marking as complete. To the years that have accumulated, the real, weighted, irreversible fact of them, and the complex experience of having lived those years and still being mid-becoming, that grief deserves to be witnessed, not solved, not reasoned away. Witnessed. What you have been experiencing, the sleeplessness, the relational visibility, the holding fatigue, the circular thinking, the unnamed sadness, all of it belongs to one coherent internal event. It belongs to this eclipse, not as something the sky is inflicting on you, but as something the sky is revealing that was already true about where you are. The eclipse does not create what you are feeling. It names it. And there is a particular relief, even when the thing being named is heavy, in finally having a name for what you have been carrying. The eclipse on March 28th and 29th is a lunar eclipse in Libra. The moon at fullness moves through the shadow of the earth, not disappearing entirely but turning that deep ruddy red that made the March 3rd blood moon such a striking sight in the pre-dawn sky. The color of iron, the color of the oldest things in the body. What is made visible not by ordinary light, but by the strange filtered luminescence that comes through shadow. Here is what is happening in the sky during these 2 days, translated entirely into what you can feel. The sun is in Aries, the first sign of the zodiac. The energy of beginning, of singular forward movement, of the pure self that does not yet know what it owes to anyone else. The moon sitting exactly opposite, is in Libra, the sign of the other, of relationship, of the complex, negotiated, perpetually balanced space where two people meet and each gives something and each receives something, and ideally, neither loses too much of themselves in the exchange. An eclipse on this axis, the Aries-Libra axis, is an eclipse that lands directly in the question of self and other. How much of yourself do you give away to maintain connection? And at what point does the giving away of yourself become indistinguishable from the disappearance of yourself? Think of it this way. Imagine a house you have lived in long enough to know in your body. Every sound it makes in different weather, the particular quality of light in every room at different hours, where the cold comes in, where the warmth gathers. You have organized your life around this house. You have made peace with all of its particularities. It is yours and you know it and it knows you. And then one morning in late March, the light comes through at an angle it has never quite come through before. The specific angle of an eclipse sky, the particular illumination that comes when the ordinary light is partially blocked. And you see something you have never noticed in all the years of living there. Not a defect, not something wrong. Something that was always there, waiting for this exact quality of light to become visible. A space you had been organizing your life around without fully knowing it was there. That space is the eclipse's gift, and what it is illuminating in the houses of your inner life right now is the corner where you have kept the agreement you made. At some point, in some relationship, for reasons that made complete sense at the time, to be somewhat smaller than you actually are. Venus, which rules Libra, is moving through Aries during these eclipse days, and this is significant. Venus in Aries is not the comfortable Venus of balance and beauty and harmonious relation. Venus in Aries is Venus returned to her own wanting. Venus asking, directly and without the softening that Libra brings, what do I actually desire? Not what is fair, not what will keep the peace, not what will minimize disruption to the people I love. What do I specifically, with this one life in these years I have remaining, what do I actually want? This is a radical question for anyone who has spent decades learning to calibrate their wanting to what is appropriate, achievable, not too much, not too costly for the people nearby. Saturn is present in this configuration as well, transiting the final degrees of Pisces, the sign of dissolution, of the borders between things becoming permeable, of the solid becoming liquid. Saturn in Pisces has been doing quiet, deep work in the past 2 years, making uncertain the things that were once certain, dissolving the structures that were built on foundations that were less solid than they appeared. Its presence during this eclipse adds a specific gravity to everything that is surfacing. This is not a light or passing reckoning. Saturn ensures that what you see during this eclipse gets registered somewhere lasting, written into the understanding you have of yourself and your life in a way that will not easily unwrite itself. The eclipse light is not flattering. It was never meant to be flattering, it was meant to be true. And so we arrive at the heart of it, the deep interior of what this eclipse is doing and what it means for the particular shape of a life that has accumulated as many years as yours has. This part requires you to stay with me without reaching for the comfortable summary. What I'm about to describe is the actual work of these eclipse days, not the work you can accomplish, the work that is being accomplished in you. Something is breaking open, not breaking apart. That distinction is worth sitting with for a moment, because for a person who has lived through genuine losses, who knows what breaking apart actually feels like from inside, the feeling of breaking open can be difficult to distinguish from the feeling of breaking down. They have a similar quality in the early stages, the same disorientation, the same sensation of things not holding the way they used to, the same temporary loss of the internal architecture that usually gives you your bearings. But breaking apart implies destruction. The thing that breaks apart is damaged in a way that reduces it. Breaking open implies something else, that what cracks is a surface, a container, an outer layer that has been holding something that has outgrown it, that the breaking is not a loss, but an expansion. That what spills out when the container breaks is not the wreckage of something undone, but the overflow of something that has become more than its vessel. You have been that vessel. The eclipse is the pressure that is finally exceeding what the vessel was designed to hold. For most of you, the breaking open is not dramatic from the outside. Your life looks, to anyone watching, exactly as it did 6 months ago. You go to the same places, you keep the same commitments, you fulfill the same roles. But inside and in the private interior that other people only partially see, something has been shifting. Some wall that you built at a certain point in your life, for reasons that were genuinely necessary, has been developing a crack. Not falling, just cracking, admitting light where there used to be only solid. And the eclipse is the moment when that crack widens enough that you cannot in good conscience pretend it is not there. What is rising to the surface as the crack widens? For most people in the age range of this eclipse's primary audience, people who have accumulated 50 years or more of living, who have earned their self-knowledge through difficulty and loss, and the particular kind of growth that only comes from having been wrong about important things. What surfaces is old, older than the current version of your life. It comes from a time before the roles solidified, before the identity stabilized into something legible and consistent, before you learned which parts of yourself to lead with and which to hold back. What surfaces is the version of you that had not yet learned to apologize for its own wanting. The capacity for desire that existed before enough disappointments taught you to want more quietly, more privately, with better odds of not being disappointed. The grief of specific years you will know when you feel them surface, that you were never fully able to mourn at the time because there was too much else to attend to, because other people needed you to be functional, because falling apart would have cost too much. That grief has extraordinary patience. It can wait 30 years. It will wait 30 years if it has to. And an eclipse in Libra with Saturn watching from Pisces is precisely the configuration that calls it back up. Not as punishment, but because it needs to complete its work. Do not be alarmed when it arrives. Do not immediately begin managing it toward resolution. Give it the dignity of being felt completely before you set about making sense of it or integrating it or using it as material for growth. Some things need to be felt first, all the way through, before they become anything else. Something else rises in a Libra eclipse, alongside the grief, a knowing, a deep, settled cellular knowing that you have been circling for years, perhaps for decades, without yet being willing to stand in directly. You know what you want your life to feel like in the years that remain to you. You know which relationships are genuinely feeding you and which are slowly depleting you. You know which commitments still belong to who you actually are and which you have been honoring out of loyalty to a version of yourself that the eclipse is marking as complete. You know which direction your life wants to move in, even if you have not yet admitted to yourself that you know it. The eclipse is not telling you something new. It is making it so difficult to pretend you do not already know that the pretending itself begins to feel more costly than the knowing. There is a pattern in your life. You know the shape of it even if you have never named it as a pattern. It has shown up across decades, in different forms, wearing different people's faces and different circumstances' clothes. But the underlying structure is recognizable. The same point at which you chose harmony over honesty. The same moment when you accommodated rather than insisted. The same quiet sacrifice, made so smoothly so early in so many situations that it became automatic, of your own position in favor of the relationship's stability. The same experience of finding yourself, at some later point, wondering when you agreed to be less than what you actually are. Libra eclipses target this pattern with unusual precision. They illuminate it not as a flaw in your character, but as a learned response. A strategy that was formed in a specific context for specific reasons and that has been running long past its appropriate season. It is worth spending a moment with how that strategy was formed, because understanding its origin is not the same as being enslaved by it. For most people who carry this particular pattern, the pattern of shrinking in the service of connection, it did not form in adulthood. It formed earlier, in a context where the stakes of being too much of yourself felt genuinely high, where love, or its near approximations, seemed to be contingent on a certain kind of manageable smallness, where you learned, through repetition that was painful enough to leave its mark, that the full force of your wanting or your feeling or your opinion created discomfort in the people whose regard you needed. And so you learned to contain, to edit, to give the world a version of yourself that was a little bit shorter than you actually stood, a little bit quieter than you actually were. and that learning served you. Do not dismiss it. It helped you survive environments and relationships that required a particular kind of accommodation. It gave you access to connection during years when the alternative, full honesty at full volume, full self in full view, might have cost you things you could not afford to lose. You adapted intelligently. You are still here in part because you knew when to adjust. But adaptation that was intelligent in one season becomes constraint in another. The child's strategy operating in the grown person's life becomes a kind of invisibility that no one asked you to maintain. Not anymore, not at this point, not in the life you have actually built. The eclipse asks one thing of this pattern, not that you dismantle it in fury or swing to the opposite extreme and suddenly begin refusing all accommodation, but that you see it clearly, without the protective softening that familiarity provides. See it for what it is. A choice that was once made under a specific kind of pressure by a younger and less resourced version of you, and that can now be made differently by someone with 50 or more years of evidence that the full weight of who you are is something the world can bear. And then there is the hardest territory of this eclipse, the passage that is most difficult to navigate and most difficult to rush. The passage of being neither the person you were nor fully the person you are becoming. This in between is not a problem. It is the necessary liminal space of all genuine transformation, but it is deeply uncomfortable. And it is uncomfortable in a way that is specific to this point in a life. Because you have earned your way out of this feeling. You have accumulated enough knowledge, enough experience, enough hard-won clarity about yourself to have expected to be past this kind of uncertainty by now. And then the eclipse arrives and says, yes, and you are still becoming. Yes, and becoming does not end because you expected it to. There is something uniquely disorienting about being in transition at this stage of life. Not because transition is harder now than it was in your 20s or 30s, but because you know more about what transitions cost. You have been through enough of them to know that the period of not yet is not brief. That it asks more of you than the dramatic moment of change does. That the actual work is not the decision or the ending or the beginning. It is the sustained, unglamorous, often invisible work of inhabiting the uncertainty without collapsing it prematurely. You know this, and knowing it does not make it easier. In some ways, knowing it makes it harder because you cannot console yourself with the illusion that it will be over soon, that clarity is just around the next corner, that if you just think about it hard enough, or talk about it thoroughly enough, or make yourself ready enough, the in-between will end on a schedule. You may have watched your children grow into their own independent lives and found yourself, in the space they're leaving created, uncertain about what belongs in that space now. You may be watching a career that has defined you for decades shift into a different form, or end entirely, or transform into something that does not yet have a clear shape. Your body has its own relationship to time and change, and you know the ways it has been communicating that relationship to you. Honestly, without diplomacy, in the language of ache and fatigue and the subtle but unmistakable awareness that you are living in a different chapter than the one you spent the middle years of your life inside. Relationships that you expected to deepen and settle into their fullness have instead revealed a ceiling you did not know was there, or a depth that requires more honesty than either person has been willing to bring to them. The life you have built is real. It is solid. But it was built by a slightly different version of you, and some of its rooms no longer fit in the way they used to, and you are not yet entirely sure which rooms you are building toward. This is not crisis. Say that again. This is not crisis. It is the legitimate discomfort of a person whose interior life has grown faster than the external structures around it have adjusted. It is what it feels like when the inside is more fully alive than the outside reflects. And the most important thing you can do in this passage, the thing the eclipse is most specifically asking of you, is to resist the urge to force it into resolution, to resist the powerful pull toward making a decisive move that will bring the uncertainty to an end. Not because the move is right, but because the discomfort of the in-between has become more than you want to sit with. The eclipse will pass, the clarity will come. But it comes after the dissolution has been allowed to complete, not before. The door to what comes next opens from the other side of fully inhabiting where you are right now. And yet even now, even in the midst of the dissolution and the uncertainty and the patient, difficult work of the in-between, something is stabilizing underneath, slowly, without announcement. The way a river, after the turbulence of a storm, does not immediately clear, but gradually as the disturbance settles and the water finds its level again, you begin to see the riverbed, not all the way down, not perfectly, but enough to know the ground is still there, enough to begin to trust your footing. For some of you, the stabilization will appear as a decision that was impossible to approach last month, now feeling approachable. Not easy, not without cost, but visible. You can see its shape now, and the shape is something you can move toward. For others, it will feel like a relationship that has been blurred by years of unspoken things beginning to come into focus. Not repaired, not necessarily resolved, but clear, seen for what it actually is, without the protective haze of wishful thinking, without the distortion that longing creates. For others still, and this one I want you to receive with particular care, the stabilization will feel like a direction becoming faintly perceptible, not a destination, not a plan, not the answer to the question of what your life is becoming, just a direction, the quietest, most tentative sense of which way to lean. You will not be certain of it. You will second-guess it, but it will have a quality unlike the eclipse's chaos, a quality of settled rightness, of being less like a desire you constructed and more like something you have always known that is finally in reach. That direction is yours. The eclipse did not create it. It was there before. The eclipse is simply the quality of light that makes it visible. The eclipse does not ask you to do more. That is the first thing to understand about what it is asking. It does not want you to optimize your response to it, manage it strategically. Read every article about what to do during a lunar eclipse and execute those recommendations with the same competence and determination you bring to everything else. What it wants, and I use that word not to make the sky into a person but to name the direction of the pull, is your willingness to stop a specific and costly kind of avoiding. Not all avoiding. Not the wise discernment that knows which battles are not yours. The specific kind of avoiding you do with yourself. The way you fill the quiet moments so you do not have to feel what lives in the quiet. The way you care for everyone within reach as a strategy for not having to sit with your own unmet needs. The way you move toward resolution before the full weight of a difficult feeling has been properly received, because the full weight of it is more than you are comfortable holding. The first invitation the eclipse offers is this. Give the difficult thing the time it actually needs. When something arises in these eclipse days, the old grief, the circular thought, the question without a clean answer, the feeling that came through the door of a small and unrelated trigger, instead of managing it toward a resolution that makes it easier to carry, try staying with it, not to understand it, not to fix it, simply to let it be present in the room with you, acknowledged, witnessed, allowed to speak at whatever pace it actually speaks. This requires a courage that is different from the courage you have been practicing. It is not the courage of doing or deciding or moving forward. It is the courage of receiving, of letting your own experience be as large as it actually is, without immediately making it more manageable. Start with 10 minutes. That is not a metaphor or a poetic suggestion. It is a concrete, specific, entirely achievable thing. Find 10 minutes in the morning or evening of these eclipse days and sit with what is present. Not in meditation necessarily. Not in formal practice, simply sit. Let the feeling be in the room. Name it to yourself quietly and without judgment. This is what I am carrying. This is what is here. You may find, and this is what most people find once they stop running from it, that what you were afraid to feel is less terrible than the anticipation of feeling it. That the actual experience of the grief, the sadness, the uncertainty is bearable, is already being born, in fact, has always been being born by you without the acknowledgement that would have made it lighter. The second invitation is this. Have one conversation you have been postponing. Not the most consequential conversation you need to have in your life. Not the one with the highest stakes or the most complex history. One conversation. The one that has been living in your body as a persistent low-grade tension. The thing you have been meaning to say to someone, or ask of someone, or honestly acknowledge with someone. That you have been delaying because the timing was never quite right, the conditions were never quite ideal. You were never quite ready enough to say the thing in the way you wanted it to land. The eclipse in Libra rules exactly this territory. It rules the space between two people where true things wait to be spoken. Its invitation is not toward explosion or confrontation or the dramatic clearing of all accumulated silences at once. It is toward one true thing, brought into the light of language, simply, briefly, without the armor of apology that usually surrounds your honest statements. The third invitation is this: write down who you are becoming. Not who you hope to be or intend to become, who you are already in this eclipse season, in the process of becoming, whether you have given yourself conscious permission or not. Write it in the present tense. This is what is being formed in me. This is what I am releasing. This is what I am refusing to release. This is what I know now that I did not know 5 years ago, or what I know now that I knew 5 years ago, but did not yet have the courage to claim. Write it as a record, not as a wish. Put it somewhere you will find it in 6 months. The evidence of your own becoming, kept in your own words, is more useful than you know. The eclipse moves through. The changes it initiates persist longer than the intensity, and there will be a day not long from now when you will want to know what was actually different about that time. What changed that I could not yet see was changing. Something did change. Something is changing. That much is already true. You have been here for 40 minutes. That is an act worth acknowledging, not because this video required stamina, but because what you have been doing for 40 minutes is paying sustained, honest attention to your own interior life, giving yourself the quality of focused presence that you regularly give to the problems of others, to the demands of work, to the needs of the people who depend on you. You turned that attention for 40 minutes toward yourself. That is not ordinary. For many people in the range of your experience, people who have spent decades becoming expert caretakers of everyone within reach, it is genuinely uncommon. And it matters. You arrived here in the days of a lunar eclipse that has been gathering since early March. An eclipse that has been asking, in the body-level language that eclipses speak, what are you holding that you are not designed to hold indefinitely? What agreement did you make at a younger and more uncertain moment in your life that has been running on automatic ever since, long past the circumstances that required it? What is trying to surface in you that the busyness and the roles and the performing of a sufficiently manageable self have been successfully keeping submerged until now? Until an eclipse that does not accept partial answers. Here is what is true about you in this specific, particular light, the filtered, iron-red light of a blood moon in Libra at the end of March. You are someone who has lived long enough and paid close enough attention to know the difference between genuine transformation and the performance of it. You know which of your changes have been real and which have been adjustments that left the underlying structure intact. The eclipse is asking for the real kind, not because it is owed to it, because you have been building toward it for long enough to have earned it. Because the version of you that this eclipse is illuminating, the one who is tired of the performance, who knows what it wants, who has carried the old grief long enough and is ready to set it down not with ceremony, but with simplicity, that version has been waiting in you longer than you know. And it is patient, but it is also done waiting. Leave a comment below, not with your intention or your aspiration or the thing you hope this eclipse will change, with a declaration of what is already true. I am finally looking at it, or whatever true version of those words belongs to you. Write that. And if this channel has been a place where you can hear yourself more clearly, subscribe, stay, more is coming that is made for exactly here. The eclipse does not ask you to become someone unrecognizable. It does not ask you to undo what you have built, or abandon the people you love, or dismantle the life that is genuinely yours. It asks something quieter, and in some ways, for a person of your intelligence and your specific history, harder. It asks you to stop pretending not to know what you already know. It asks you to let the version of yourself that is entirely real take up its proper space in your relationships, in your choices, in the way you speak when speaking honestly is difficult, In the way you ask for what you need, in a voice that does not apologize for having needs. You are allowed to take up your proper space. You have been allowed to all along. That permission was never the eclipse's to give. It was never the sky's to grant or the stars to bestow. It was always yours. It has always been yours. The eclipse is simply the moment when it becomes too costly, too exhausting, and finally too dishonest, to yourself above anyone, to pretend you did not already know that.